Imagine standing in the courtyard of a medieval palace. The air is thick with incense and sweat. Trumpets blare, banners ripple in the wind, and a crowd gathers, not for a celebration, but for a punishment. Soldiers drag a trembling prisoner before the throne. The king does not speak. His silence is enough. In moments, justice will be served, but not in the way we might imagine today. For here, punishment is not correction. It is theater. It is terror. It is power on full display. What happens when justice becomes a spectacle? Throughout history, monarchs cloaked themselves in the divine right to rule. Their word was law, and their punishments, often designed with chilling creativity, were meant to remind subjects of their absolute authority. These were not simple executions. They were performances of pain, orchestrated to instill obedience and silence dissent. The crack of the whip, the roar of animals, the cries of the condemned, each became part of a brutal symphony that reinforced the power of the crown. Yet many of these punishments have been scrubbed from official histories, buried beneath gilded portraits and grand palaces. Chroniclers, loyal to their patrons, often glorified the majesty of rulers while concealing the darker truths. But the whispers survived, in letters, in foreign accounts, in fragments of law and rumor. In this documentary, we uncover those whispers. From the wheels of Europe to the elephants of Asia, from burning flesh to thousand cuts, these punishments reveal a terrifying side of royalty rarely spoken about. Stay with us as we peel back the golden veil of history to expose the blood-stained realities kings and queens tried to hide. To understand these punishments, we must first understand the world that produced them. In royal courts across Europe, Asia, and beyond, punishment was never just about crime, it was about control. Kings, queens, and emperors were not merely rulers, they were symbols of divine will. To challenge them was to challenge the order of the universe itself. And so, punishment became more than retribution. It became a performance, carefully staged, to remind everyone watching of the crown's absolute power. Jean Froissart, the 14th century French chronicler, recorded countless tales of royal justice during the 100 Years' War. His accounts reveal not only the punishments themselves, but the pageantry that surrounded them. Executions conducted in marketplaces, crowds summoned to witness, nobles in attendance as if it were a festival. These were not private affairs. They were spectacles, designed to echo long after the victim's screams had faded. In Asia, a similar logic prevailed. Ming dynasty decrees in China sanctioned punishments like lingqi, the so-called death by 1,000 cuts, carried out in public squares to demonstrate imperial authority. In Mughal India, elephants trained for execution symbolized both majesty and merciless power, reminding subjects that even nature bent to the emperor's will. The message was clear across cultures. Bloodshed was a language of rule. A monarch who punished dramatically was a monarch feared and therefore obeyed. Royal punishments blurred the line between politics and theater, between justice and horror. The crown gleamed with jewels, but beneath the gold lay the iron fist of fear. The roots of royal punishments lie deep in the soil of divine authority. For centuries, monarchs across cultures claimed their thrones, not by the will of men, but by the will of God, or the mandate of heaven. To disobey a king was not just treason, it was blasphemy. And so, punishments became rituals of sacred violence, cloaked in the language of faith and legitimacy. In medieval Europe, royal edicts and legal codes like England's Statute of Treasons, 1352, codified brutal forms of execution, hanging, drawing, and quartering, as punishments for those who dared to oppose the crown. Chroniclers described them as righteous acts, portraying kings as defenders of divine order. Yet between the lines, one senses the horror. The mutilation of bodies served not merely as law, but as warning. In Asia, similar patterns emerged. The Ming dynasty justified Ling Qi as a punishment reserved for the gravest crimes, often framed as offenses against cosmic harmony. The Mughal emperors issued decrees where execution by elephants was depicted as a spectacle of divine justice, a reminder that power flowed through the emperor from God himself. Chroniclers, dependent on royal patronage, rarely condemned such spectacles. Instead, they glorified the ruler's decisiveness and might. The bias is evident. Cruelty was erased, majesty exalted. But for the people in the crowd, the lesson was unmistakable. These punishments were theater, scripted to etch terror into the minds of subjects. Every scream reinforced obedience. Every drop of blood reminded the living of their place beneath the crown. Centuries passed. Royal punishments did not fade. They escalated. Methods became more elaborate, more symbolic and more terrifying, each designed to etch fear deep into the collective memory of a kingdom. In imperial China, lingqi, or death by 1,000 cuts, was perhaps the most infamous. Carried out in bustling public squares, it was not only a method of execution, but a ritual of humiliation. A French missionary, Père Abbé Dubois, wrote of the horror he witnessed. The body was carved while the crowd gasped, as if each cut were an offering to authority. Here, cruelty itself became a language of law, each incision a reminder of the emperor's reach. In Europe, the breaking wheel stretched punishment into a grotesque display of endurance. Victims' limbs were shattered one by one, their bodies left exposed to birds and weather. The Holy Roman Empire turned this wheel into a symbol of divine justice, a public stage where suffering equaled obedience. Letters from foreign envoys describe the silence of the crowd, broken only by the crack of bones. Fear was the lesson, obedience the goal. In Mughal India, elephants became executioners. With a single command, these colossal beasts could crush a traitor or tear them apart. To subjects, the sight carried layers of meaning. Nature itself bowed to the emperor's will. European visitors to Delhi recorded both awe and dread, noting how the crowd fell into reverent silence as the elephant struck. Across these empires, the pattern was the same. Punishment was not justice, but theater, and its impact was devastating. Societies, ruled not just by law, but by terror carved into flesh. If royal punishments were theatre, then the Tudor courts of England staged some of history's most gruesome performances. Under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, traitors were burned, hanged, or dismembered before cheering or horrified crowds. To be convicted of treason meant more than death. It meant ritualized destruction. Eyewitnesses wrote of the stench of burning flesh drifting over London as heretics and rebels alike were consumed by fire. For those condemned to be drawn and quartered, the spectacle reached new depths. Heads spiked on city gates, limbs displayed on bridges, each fragment of a body transformed into a royal warning. Far to the east, Persian kings perfected punishments. So ghastly they blurred the line between cruelty and nightmare. One of the most infamous was scaphism, or the boat. Described by Herodotus, though historians caution his bias, the victim was trapped between two hollowed logs, force-fed milk and honey, then left to the insects and the sun. The buzzing of flies, the sweetness turning rancid, the cries of the condemned, these became the soundtrack of power. Though some debate its frequency, the account survives as a chilling symbol of how far monarchs might go to assert dominance. European envoys and early modern legal texts record the reactions of spectators. Some prayed, others watched in silence. While children were warned to remember the king's justice, the lesson was unmistakable. Punishment was a pageant of fear, meant to outlive the victim and echo through generations. And though centuries have passed, the logic remains familiar. Modern authoritarian regimes may not break bodies on wheels or leave them to insects, but they still use spectacle Trials, public humiliations, even media broadcasts, to remind subjects who holds the power. The theatre of fear endures. History remembers kings and queens through portraits of majesty, golden crowns, jeweled robes, and towering palaces. But behind the gilded facade, another truth lingers. Power without limits turned cruelty into performance. Royal punishments were not simply sentences, they were spectacles designed to remind every subject that defiance meant agony. Blood was not hidden. It was displayed, paraded, and sanctified as justice. This duality, the pageantry of power against the barbarity of punishment, reveals the true paradox of monarchy. The same rulers who commissioned cathedrals, sponsored art, and shaped nations, also sanctioned horrors that reduced human life to theatre. The clash of trumpets and the cries of the condemned rang together in courtyards where justice was supposed to dwell. These acts were not justice. They were crimes against humanity. They were tools of fear, calculated to strip people of dignity and silence opposition. To study them is not to glorify violence, but to confront how power can corrupt when left unchecked. Which punishment shocked you the most? Was it the wheel, the elephants, the burning stakes, or the nightmare of the boats? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these hidden truths deserve to be told, remember to like this video, subscribe for more untold history, and join the discussion. Because only by remembering can we ensure such spectacles are never repeated. In the courts of kings, justice bled, and history remembers the screams. Disclaimer. This documentary is for educational purposes only. It does not promote violence, hatred, or cruelty. The events described are condemned as inhumane and unjust.